India has always depended heavily on the crude oil and gas for energy generation. But over the years, with crude oil prices fluctuating and increasing awareness of the need for renewable energy, the focus has shifted to more sustainable sources of energy like solar. Taking this into perspective, Bloomberg TV India, in association with Tata Power Solar, brought together an event on building new strategies around decentralized distributed solar generation. The keynote speech was delivered by Tarun Kapoor, Joint Secretary of New and Renewable Energy, who highlighted the government's agenda on driving energy security through solar power in India.
In the scale-up plan which we are preparing for solar now, because we are all talking of scaling up the targets to 100 gigawatts, distributed generation is going to play a very major role. It's going to play probably the largest role, largest chunk, and that is an area where we feel that growth should happen automatically, because now that we've reached a stage where the tariffs of solar have fallen drastically, the capital costs have come down, where from a rooftop owner can generate power at say 7.5, 8.5 rupees, depending on what kind of roof and what kind of location, DNI, etc. So therefore it makes a lot of sense, even without government subsidy, to go for distributed generation, to go for grid connected rooftops. We are also now working with banks to come up with some schemes so that at least loans are available and people are able to go for rooftops even without subsidy, but at least financing is possible. Distributed generation also includes off-grid. So off-grid is again a huge market for India, particularly in areas where adequate power is not available, or where grid has not reached, or where grid has reached but still people don't get power for more than 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. It's just a question of how to tap this market and reduce dependence on government subsidies if we have to do large volumes, and see how we can take this forward.
Ajay Goel, CEO of Tata Power Solar, set the tone for the event with a special address.
As we look at solar industry at an inflection point in India, where with the graces of the new government, we are looking to grow this industry not just 5-fold but 10-fold from where it stands today. What role does distributed generation play? Are we really looking at only large solar plants in solar parks, or is there room for rooftops and distributed generation in people's backyards to play a role in the big picture? So what we want to do is to start off and have a debate about that and discuss what are the areas in which the country should focus on and drive for the growth in the distributed generation market.
With the ambitious targets of the government laid out by Tarun Kapoor, Mini Menon, executive editor of Bloomberg TV India, began by asking him about the model of public-private partnership that he foresees to achieve the goals set by the government.
Most of the development in solar, even today, is happening with the private sector.
Sure.
And it will continue to happen with the private sector. So the models which are currently on are the distribution companies go for tenders, or some of our PSUs, Government of India PSUs, go for tenders. They invite private sector to put up power plants, and then they buy the power. There are PPAs for 25 years. That PPA period we may extend to 40 years, or we may allow the company which sets up a power plant to have a PPA with us for 25 years, but do another 15 years on their own, which means that they can offer a lower tariff because they have a longer period to operate. We are also looking at third-party sale or open access, so that people can generate and supply to the industry or to large consumers directly on their own. For this, the important thing is that open access should be allowed. Transmission network should be there and open access should be allowed. Second important thing is that the charges for open access, charges for wheeling, charges for... There are also some cross-subsidy charges. All those charges should go away, or they should be so low that it makes sense to buy power from generators directly, because that would then open out the market to the private sector. Because the weak link here are the distribution companies, because distribution companies sometimes delay payments. That's a problem. So that does become a risk for people who want to put in money here.
Parag, a quick reaction to this, because this is quite, important and significant. The new rules of engagement, where the private and public sector will come together. As an IPP yourself, how do you foresee this? And what do you think are the need gaps that need to be addressed if you were to scale it up to the category that we are looking at?
A couple of good things that we are observing in the market. One is that there's a lot of funds that can be provided by the equipment suppliers. We are seeing that a lot of Chinese module manufacturers, a lot of US module manufacturers are ready to infuse funds and be a co-developer along with IPPs like us. We are seeing a good move from a lot of funds from the Foreign Development Bank, the US Exims. So there is a lot of channels which are open for raising funds. But having said that, the key issues that government needs to handle for the point of view of easing out the norms for caps on lending to one particular entity. Caps are not there on the renewable sector, it is there on the power sector. If there is a separate cap which is carved out for the renewable sector, can address.
We will discuss a lot of this, but I know you have to leave us. I'm going to squeeze in two quick questions. One is the fact that a lot of the charter for renewable and solar rests with the state government. Are you seeing a perceptible change in the way state governments are approaching it? And the second is a predictability of tariff. That's a big issue that is keeping away investors in the area of solar. So your quick two comments on these.
So in the last I would say 1 year, we've seen a lot of change. Earlier, we were almost trying to force the state governments to buy solar, and it was being driven solely by renewable purchase obligation. And no state was willing to go beyond the RPO which was declared by the regulator. Now we have states who want to go beyond that on their own. They're not bothering about the RPO. They want to buy solar because they feel that solar is cheap, they feel that solar is reliable, solar brings investment into the state, and it generates employment. Now let's take the case of, say, Andhra. Andhra has plans to do, I think, maybe 8,000-9,000 megawatts, which is much, much more than their RPO. Rajasthan has declared a plan for 25,000 megawatts. Similarly, Telangana wants to do a larger quantity. Karnataka has already come up with 2-3 tenders, and they also have a large plan. Even Maharashtra, where they earlier were not very keen, now they're also talking of large quantities. MP is talking of a large plan. So therefore, states on their own also feel that even if they're not forced, they should go for solar in a big way. And therefore, what I see in the future is that it's just that the states have to realize that solar is close to grid parity. On a 25-year calculation, it is already at grid parity. Another good thing which is happening, good for us, is that the price of coal is going up, domestic coal at least. International coal prices are falling, but at least domestic coal is either not available or the price is going up. So in the recent bids for thermal-based power, coal-based power, the tariffs have been around 5.5 to 6 rupees with fuel pass-through, which means that actually the tariffs will go up in the future. Now if you compare that with solar, where we've seen tariffs of 6.5 rupees, and some tenders, they have started with 580 or 590 with some escalation. So this means that solar now is comparable with thermal, and you're getting clean power and you're getting power investment within your state. So therefore it does make sense. It's just all the states have to be convinced about it. So I think there is a big change.
I'm going to start off with you, Mr. Popli, because I think somewhere, and that's a question, and I'm sure as the person who's funding most of these projects, it's often asked to you. The fact is that the solar cost of generation is coming down, but the money costs remain extremely high. We are in a regime where costs anywhere are high. Do you really think that this kind of a rollout is going to be possible in the current scenario?
See, primarily, if we are talking about 100 gigawatt in next 5 to 6 years, it is a huge amount of money. So no amount of subsidy will help it. So the market is going to play its role. And as of now, the market rates are pretty high. So as our economy strengthens, probably the interest rates fall down. And the second is for rooftop and off-grid market. Definitely the government can also subsidize. We also have plans that probably there are multilateral, bilateral agencies who are willing to provide financing, where the financing cost is much lower, the hedging cost is high. So hedging cost can be taken care because over the years we have seen long term the cost comes to around 3 to 4%. At present the hedging cost is around 6 to 7%. So maybe we can peg it at 4% and then take help of National Clean Energy Fund to give interest, to give funding at maybe 8 to 9% to the consumers.
Ajay, is that a big lacuna, and what is the sense that you're getting from developers, from the stakeholders in this business?
No, I think, see, you need three things, right? As you're talking about, costs have come down. I think the policies are starting to get clearer and clearer, Mr. Tarun Kapoor said. I think financing remains the last big hurdle for the growth of this sector. So Mr. Popley said, I think the cost of financing will come down, but not just cost, the access to financing still remains a hurdle. Many of the developers that we talk to still say that they don't have access to enough funds, particularly from Indian sources, because of limits around infrastructure lending. Most of the people who want to put distributed generation rooftops also struggle with getting financing. So I think that's something that I would love to hear the group's views on as to how we get more funds available.
I think you were talking about funding as a big issue, and in your case you have been funded by Goldman Sachs and you've been able to raise money internationally. What are the big constraints in funding according to you?
In solar, as there is no feed-in tariff mechanism, it's very difficult to project our pipeline. We suddenly win a bid of 200 megawatts and then it might be 5-6 months, we will lose 2-3 bids and then there is no pipeline. So this unpredictability in the pipeline, and which Mr. Tarun Kapoor also highlighted, can be addressed if at least the part of the capacities which are coming out may be through the feed-in tariff mechanisms. So that is definitely one point. Look, largely conceptually, if we see, we as a country have to move towards renewables. Maybe in the initial phase, maybe subsidies, particularly in the distributed generation, might be helpful to make a project economically viable. But I think with time, it will be on a standalone basis viable and funds should not be an issue post that.
Mr. Popley, what are the steps, the 3-4 steps? Now, let's look at solutions. You mentioned a few. What are the 3-4 steps that we need to take to make funding accessible? Because the fact is it's not accessible to many.
See, solar has started only recently, 2009-10. So initially banks were in fact financial institutions were hesitant to fund solar projects because there was no track record in India of the quality and of the capacity utilization factor that they will achieve, and also whether the modules will run for 25 years. Now the confidence has started building. Same thing happened in wind also. Wind, now there is a tendency to, bankers are willing to look at projects and there is enough competition amongst the lending community to take good projects. Similar thing is bound to happen in solar. The things have started, banks have, financial institutions have now more confidence. And if you look at global scenario also, globally also in last 3 years, there is more investment coming into renewables than in conventional. That is bound to happen in India, and once that happens, the banks and financial institutions will shift their focus from conventional to renewable.
Yeah, Amit, you are the Chief Sustainability Officer at Coca-Cola. How are you seeing this whole renewable picture? And in your plans, is this a lucrative, tangible way of accessing power?
We've had a solar power meet within our own company about a year ago. We called a lot of solar developers. What we realized, the vision was coming from our CEO that we would like to be 40% renewable energy by 2020. We also realized that our power is inflating at a rate higher than inflation. So most of the studies show that in most of the states, either we had the quality of the power also is a question, but more importantly, the inflation on the power cost was very, very high. Second is that we realized that we have almost 5 to 6 acres of rooftop in most of our plants. So our rooftop was good for 1 megawatt power, which was good for running the plant, even if the plant is not running. Ours are seasonal plants, so they stop and start. But even the utilities, the treatment facilities, the street lighting, security, cold rooms, they consume about 4 to 5% of the total power, which was good with a 1 megawatt off-grid kind of power from solar, and that's what we've started working on now. We also looked at various opportunities of buying power on a PPA mode from solar providers, and some states have started doing it. And we are very keenly looking in AP and in Karnataka. We already have a deal in Karnataka. We are getting a deal in AP, where somebody is going to give us solar power on a PPA mode, which is a very good thing, because we stand committed. Because of us, there is a development in the capacity of solar power, although we have not invested. Investment is obviously a very high value. For us to get to 40% renewables on a pure basis is going to take us 1,200 crores of investment. So we have realized that we have to have a mix method of sourcing power. It has to be a power purchase agreement, it has to be group captive, and it also has to be some of the capex on our own facilities. We've seen that some of the states have rules which are tighter than the others, some do not have. For example, UP, there is hardly any trading opportunities. The state is more or less closed, although the Electricity Act allows anyone and everyone to work in that space. Power is available free as long as somebody is ready to give you. But the state governments also have to come and make that enabling environment.
Hindsight, since you've worked in the American markets and you've studied what has happened in Germany and in China, and one of the solutions that you've actually done a study on is this whole issue of decentralized distribution. How does it work and how will it stack up?
See, the most successful markets that we've seen is Germany, California, or even others, right, where distributed generation works. They set up easy mechanisms for financing entities or developers such as Renew to fund these distributed generation assets. Today, when we start to do that in India, it runs into a morass of policy and other regulatory issues. One immediate hurdle to cross is to make that policy framework much more clear. So in the US, for instance, the investment tax credit has led to a tax equity market that funds a lot of these assets. Whereas when you look at India, while these plants are eligible for accelerated depreciation, but that cannot be availed of by an investor. It can only be availed of by Coke, let's say, if they put the plant themselves. So some of these simple fixes, right, which doesn't cost the government any extra money, but clarify the policy environment, would go a long way in order to make this a much more sustainable and a much more attractive market for investment to come in.
You do a lot of work in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana and also Rajasthan. I think these are the 3-4 states that are in the forefront of this. What are the mechanisms that can make solar really take off?
So pretty largely there are two brackets. One is the ground mounted utility scale projects and the second is the distributed generation rooftop projects. So government of these states has to fire on all the engines. So once we talk about the ground mounted projects, so whatever maximum they can do by setting up solar parks, so that is one angle. So they give land, they arrange for evacuation and they call for the bids. So that will lead to faster implementation in a larger scale. Secondly, on the other hand, they can also call for bids, which Telangana and Andhra recently done, where land and the evacuation has to be taken care by the developer. So that is what exactly Andhra is doing. So on one hand, they have a 2500 megawatt large solar park, which they are setting up. On the other hand, they also called for a 500 megawatt bid, where the responsibility of delivering power was of the developer. So this is what a state can do on the ground mounted side. On the rooftop side or the distributed generation side, look, there are many issues. So a person can do distributed generation in two ways. One is the rooftop and other is the open access, which Saha was mentioning. So on the rooftop, what minimal we need is a net metering. And second thing that we need is a no cross subsidy surcharge being levied. So in fact, in the draft of the Electricity Act amendment, we have been pushing, and I think it is in place now, where there will be no cross-subsidy surcharge on the renewable sector. So that would be a real push in one sense.
How does distributed generation, what can be the framework to make it really conducive?
I think it's more of implementation. Government has been talking a lot. Everybody knows the solution to it. It's just the implementation. Second issue is these two things like net metering and the cross-subsidy surcharge waiver. These are the two policy initiatives required for the rooftop and the wheeling banking arrangements for the open access consumers.
Right. Mr. Bokle?
Yeah, I agree with Parag. Distributed generation will remain a very, very important area. And I think now the focus has shifted. When we are talking about 100 gigawatt, 30 gigawatt has to come from distributed generation. I think now everybody is going to take a look at it. Earlier, the Jawaharlal National Solar Mission only talked about 2000 megawatt from off-grid. Now we are talking almost about 30 to 40% because we realize the advantages are huge. You don't have to create additional infrastructure. You obviate the need for transmission line. So I think the policies are going to follow once the need is established.
Ajay, you've commissioned a study on this. Tell me, what are the 2-3 highlights of what can be done to really make this an achievable target?
See, we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've sort of seen this all over the world, how this could be a key enabler of solar. And we are in this situation where customers like Amit here and providers like Renew here and with Parag really are willing to come together and form a solution. But there are a lot of these little roadblocks, hurdles on the way because of legacy reasons that need to be solved. And I don't think we can solve them one at a time. And perhaps a solution would be for the government, and I wish Mr. Tarun Kapoor was still here, set up like a task force, give it 3 months and say, what are the 10 things you need to fix all together to make this a mainstream market? Let us not go fix one thing at a time and then say next thing goes to the next budget. If you're serious about this as a country, let's set up a concerted task force that add the interested states to be the part of the solution rather than doing this centrally, and have them come together with a policy blueprint for how to make distributed generation sustainable market for India.
What, to sum up, are the 2 major pain points for this, and what are the 2 learnings that you could take from other markets like Germany or China?
I think the one of the biggest sort of pain point is the policy uncertainty that Parag was saying, whether you're going to have cross-subsidy charges, not going to have. So policy uncertainty is one of the biggest pain points that holds the adoption down from the customer point of view, because they don't know what is the predictability of price that I'm going to get from this power, and same thing from the supplier side. The second piece of uncertainty is from the investor side around what are going to be my returns. And I think having a solar feed-in tariff would make those returns predictable. I know there are several other issues, but I think if we solve these 2, I think it will go a long way, probably more than 50-60% of the way to solving this problem. Because today the investors don't look at this as an opportunity and they don't know what is my tariff going to be. So wind has come a long way because of feed-in tariff, and it's time for solar to do the same.
Amit, I'll let you have the last word. A lot of companies want to do the change, are not doing it, and they're apprehensive. What is your advice to them, and what is your key learning from this whole experiment that you've done with renewable?
We found success in some states and not found success in some others, and therefore there must be that there is certain enabler or an enabling environment which is good in some states and not very good in the others. The predictability of the rates, the cross subsidy, the open access, and ability to really deal in a very transparent manner. Something which we have seen in let's say if I have to put one state in amongst all for my distributed kind of load is Karnataka. So what is that Karnataka is doing which UP cannot?
Sure.
And I think at a macro level, if you look at 40% of villages not having power at all, this is the best way to get the distributed power, because we all consider that we have a huge network of power lines, but if you really see, the network is really thin. We don't have huge arteries from north to south or from east to west. Even between the states, the power is not something which can be dealt with across the state. So I think the enabling environment and the best practices are right here.
And I think we are in a sweet spot, but right now the focus should be on implementation. Learn from the best practices, because you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Then I think all the stakeholders need to come together to have a concerted plan on how to achieve this target so that it doesn't remain another figure in a government file. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me.